Our Old Testament is from Psalm 23. I'm beginning a series on the 23rd Psalm. So let's listen to this word. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And continuing in our New Testament lesson, there's a change in the bulletin. Rather than John's Gospel, our New Testament lesson is from Hebrews chapter 13. God has said, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can people do to me?" Remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings. This is the word of the Lord. Well, I was out of town all week last week. I was with a lot of other pastors at a Presbyterian conference center on Lake Tahoe. I really suffer for the Lord. I know that. It's a beautiful place, great people. One night, several of us went out to eat together away from the conference center, and those of us who had gone out together had formed a close bond and friendship, and after supper, someone, and it's not important to know who, suggested that we celebrate our friendship by going out and getting tattoos. But what to get? A cross, perhaps? Or an ancient Christian symbol? Or dolphins, maybe? Or maybe a biblical reference. Now, someone, and again, it's not important to know who, suggested that the biblical reference we should have tattooed on our arms should be Leviticus 19:28. And pretty soon, someone in the group was asking the waitress for a recommendation for a good tattoo place, and we were told the best place around was Monster Tattoo. So we paid the bill, and we headed out to the tattoo place, and suddenly I'm in the car thinking, this is not a good thing. This joke among us has taken on a life of its own. And I suggested that instead of spending all that time and money getting Leviticus 19:28 tattooed on our arms, maybe we should just get a dot. You know, like the letter I, except without the I, just the dot. Now, everyone seemed to be excited about getting Leviticus 19:28 on our arms. Leviticus 19:28. I see some of you opening Bibles already, and some of you have smartphones in your hand. I'm hoping that you're Googling it instead of calling someone. But for those of you who don't know, Leviticus 19:28 says, "Do not put tattoos on yourselves." And then with emphasis, it says, "For I am the Lord." Now, fortunately, when we got to the tattoo place, it was closed. We didn't get the chance to have our tattoos, and the next day, the magical moment had gone forever, and we lost our enthusiasm for getting those tattoos. By the way, Leviticus 19:27, the one right before that, is the one that says men should not shave their beards. I'm just saying. Now, a lot of you have tattoos. I know that. Some of you got tattoos in the military. Some of you have had tattoos since World War II. Some of you have had tattoos for less than a month or a week. And there's nothing wrong with getting tattoos. And I often hear, however, and I know you do too, I hear people complaining about the proliferation of tattoos on bodies today. They're all up and down the arm, they're on the back. Every inch of skin is a target for a tattoo. Now, why would anybody complain about whether or not someone else gets a tattoo? Well, it's because it's a change in our culture. It's something that's new and different, even though tattoos have been around for a long time. Back in my day, someone will say, women did not get tattoos. Or, back in my day, you didn't get so many tattoos. It's a change. It's different. And what about all those men wearing ponytails? I've had it with people like that. Why don't people like that? Because it's a change. It's different. Back in my day, men had short hair. And what about the music the young people are playing today? Now that's something no other generation has ever said. And the way people dress today. Or what about, and you can fill in the blank. The world is changing. Our world is changing more today than ever before. At this conference that I went to last week, one of the things we talked about on the very first day was change. And we talked about how the church has changed since 1950. For some reason, the 1950s were the golden years of the church. Oh, for the way things used to be. Back in the 1950s, everybody went to church. Stores were closed on Sundays. There was no youth soccer or community baseball for the young people on Sundays. The church was respected by everybody. Well, today we're just tolerated. Back then, the pastor was always invited to have a prayer with the team before the football game on Friday nights. Today, there's no public prayer in the church at all. In the 1950s, everyone wore a suit and a tie or a dress to church. No flip-flops, no short pants, no preachers with ponytails. Back in my day, one might say, things were much better. The world and the church are changing. They're changing fast, faster than we can keep up with. And we don't like that. We like things to stay the way they are. I read about a study that was taken recently in which a group of people were given two different kinds of chocolate to try out and to decide which was best. And one chocolate was described as having a brand new recipe using a few new ingredients. And the other chocolate was described as having had the same recipe using the same ingredients for 73 years. And this taste test, overwhelmingly, the people selected the chocolate that had not changed in 73 years. Two things are visible from that kind of study. The first is it shows that we like things to remain the same. There's something about us that has a bias against this constant change that we're experiencing. The other thing about that study, both chocolates were the same. They came out of the same box, used the same ingredients. Who knows whether they were new or been around for a while? It was that bias against change. Well, we've always been that way. Oh, back in my day, things were better. Why did they have to change? Look at the Bible as an example. Exodus chapter 14. Moses has led the people out of the promised land. Now, that's a good change. But it doesn't matter. It's a change. And change brings grief and loss about whatever has changed. Now, this is what happens in Exodus 14. They have just recently left Egypt. And in verse 10 it says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they cried out, terrified, to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to this desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? Now, let me stop here and say, I don't think they actually said that. while they were in Egypt. They didn't say that until after they had gotten out, after they had the change. Leave us alone. We like being slaves. Never happened. But change does that to people. And the people are in grief, and they are afraid of the changes that are happening, even the good change. And they miss the good old days of slavery when the only good thing was that it was predictable. One day the same as the next. Picking up in verse 13, Moses says something really dumb. Now, Moses doesn't say dumb things very often, but he does here. Moses answered the people by saying, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm." In other words, don't change anymore. Just stay where you are, the way you are. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. In other words, Moses gets sucked into this attitude of the people about change. They want the good old days of Egypt and slavery. And Moses says, stand firm. No more changes. Just pray and God will fix everything. Now that sounds good on the surface. Doesn't really sound dumb at all until you read what God says. Moses says, stand firm. Be still. Don't change. God says in verse 15, stop praying and get moving. Raise up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry land. Talk about a change. That's a big one. But we resist change. But God is always calling us to move, to change, to grow. Now, some of the changes we go through in life are more than just the silly stuff like tattoos and hairstyle. It's cancer. It's death. It's no longer being able to drive. It's the loss of physical activity because of aging or illness. It's people who are important to us moving away. It's the loss of a job, the death of a marriage. Oh, for the good old days of yesterday. If we had just stayed in Egypt. In the Old Testament, there's a psalm written by people who have experienced the greatest of all changes. Their nation has been invaded. The people have been forced into exile to go to Babylon. And the invading army had taken the temple choir out of Jerusalem, which was the Mormon tabernacle choir of its day. It was the best choir in the land. And they are exiling them into Babylon because when the Babylonians invaded, the way they controlled the people, they took the best and the brightest and the leaders and pulled them out of the land and moved them away so there could not be a rebellion. And so they're taking the great choir on their way to Babylon, and the invaders say, sing us one of the songs you used to sing in the temple. Entertain us. We're in the mood for some good music tonight. And in response, this is what the Jewish choir sang. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept. And we remembered Zion, the temple, Jerusalem. And on the trees there, we hung up all of our musical instruments. For there our captors desired of us song. And our tormentors demanded of us songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? In other words, in the midst of change, they have lost their homes, their work, their temple, and now they've lost their identity. They're singers, but how can they sing? Change has that kind of impact on people. The loss of so much and the loss of identity. The passage continues, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I don't remember you, if I don't consider Jerusalem my highest joy." In other words, they're stuck in the past. Change has come, like it or not, and they have made a promise. They're never going to forget the past. Their theme will always be, back in my day, we were in Jerusalem. They don't know what Paul promises in the New Testament when he says, in all things, God works for good. On their way to Jerusalem, as they grieve about the loss of their past, they don't know the good things that God will do in the midst of that tragedy. The creation of synagogues in the Jewish culture, all of the wonderful literature that's about to be written, including some of the greatest prophetic literature of the Bible, the creation of the Hebrew alphabet, which, by the way, as a former Hebrew student, that might not have been a good thing. They write it backwards, you know. And the beginning of the canon, which is the table of contents of the Bible. They're beginning to understand there's a difference between literature written by holy people and the holy Word of God. All they see, though, is their moment of grief and fear in the face of change. And then in this psalm, there's an awful passage. "O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us, who takes your infants and dashes those infants against the rocks." Really? That's in the Bible? Yes, because grief and anger are such close cousins. We often respond to change in our lives with grief and, yes, anger. So what do? How do you deal with this change? Cancer, death, job loss, retirement, birth, good change, bad change. Doesn't matter. All of the changes are hard. What do you do? What do you do? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. That's the way we deal with change. We trust the shepherd. We know the shepherd. He calls us by name when we trust him. The shepherd leads us into wonderful places, calm waters, quiet places. An abundant table with cups that are overflowing with good things. The shepherd also leads us in places we might not want to go. Dark valleys of death and loss and fear. But the Lord is my shepherd, and we trust. We live in a world that is constantly changing more than at any other time in history. And people don't like change. You've heard that. I bet some of you have said it. People don't like change. Well, I don't believe that. We like change. I like to go to movies I've never seen before. I love to see a book by a favorite author, a book I haven't read yet. I like to read new authors I've never read before. I like going to places I've never been before, meeting people I haven't met yet. The issue is not we don't like change. The issue is we love and desperately need some things that are familiar in our life that we can count on that will never change. We desperately need something in our life that in the midst of all the changes of life, we can count on something being the same. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In the midst of a changing world, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want.